Since he became President of the United States on 20th January 2021, President Biden has had only two face-to-face meetings with foreign leaders. All his other meetings up to now have been conducted virtually, either by conference, virtual conferencing, or on the telephone. The two leaders that he has met one-to-one are Prime Minister Suga of Japan and President Moon of South Korea. I should say that this will change in June when President Biden is due to travel to Europe, where he will attend a G7 meeting of the core members of the Western Alliance, and where he's also due to attend a meeting of NATO. At that point, he will finally, and for the first time, have proper one-to-one meetings with the leaders of the various European states with which the United States is allied. On 16th June 2021, he will of course meet President Putin of Russia in Geneva. But the fact remains that up to now, the only two leaders that President Biden has met on a one-to-one basis are Prime Minister Suga of Japan and President Moon of South Korea, both of whom significantly were invited to Washington, where they met the US President. And that is indicative of President Biden and the administration's foreign policy priorities. Their priorities are not Europe and Russia, as many expected, and they're not the Middle East, as many expected also. On the contrary, we see a general retreat of the United States from the Middle East, with negotiations with Iran for the United States to try to rejoin the JCPOA, and we see a purposeful attempt by the United States to try to achieve some form of de-escalation with Russia in Europe, thus the meeting on the 16th of June 2021 with President Putin, and thus the various steps to de-escalate tensions in Europe, which we have seen over the last few weeks, which I have discussed at length in various videos for this channel. The meetings with Prime Minister Suga of Japan and President Moon of South Korea, however, indicate the administration and the US government's priority. That is challenging China in the Pacific. We see a major US buildup in the Pacific. We see attempts by the United States to strengthen the so-called Quad, the informal grouping made up of the United States, Australia, New Zealand, and India, supposedly, and Japan, supposedly to contain China. And of course, we now see these meetings with Prime Minister Suga of Japan and President Moon of South Korea. South Korea and Japan are the US's two critical military allies in the Pacific. Australia and New Zealand are important for their for their intelligence cooperation, and Australia does have a significant military. But it is in Japan and South Korea that the greater part of US military force in the Pacific is based. The United States has extensive naval bases in Japan and large numbers of troops there, especially on the island of Okinawa. And it also has large numbers of troops in South Korea, where it also has nuclear weapons. And of course, it also operates and has the THAAD anti-ballistic missile systems located in South Korea too. Now, the US forces in South Korea are nominally intended not to defend South Korea from China and not to threaten China. They are intended to act as a deterrent from an attack on South Korea by North Korea, which fought a war with South Korea in the early 1950s, in which the United States became directly involved. US troops have been based in South Korea ever since that war took place, that war never having formally ended, there being nothing more than an armistice, and with the North Korean government still rejecting the legitimacy of the government in South Korea. And it is true to say that North Korea has, in the last 2 decades, been systematically building up its armed forces. North Korea now has a potent nuclear weapons capability, including intercontinental ballistic missiles and equipped with nuclear warheads, some of which may be able to reach the United States. And it has recently showcased a large arsenal of advanced conventional weapons with which it appears to be re-equipping its armed forces. These include tanks, advanced tanks, surface-to-air missile systems, advanced artillery systems, weapons whose potency we don't fully know and which may be more a case of showcasing than reality, but which nonetheless must be causing increasing concern both on the part of US planners and to some extent South Korean planners also. But though the emphasis when talking to South Korea is always apparently on North Korea, in reality, the reason why President Biden is meeting with President Moon of South Korea is because the United States increasingly sees China as the main challenge to the United States and wants to enlist countries like Japan and South Korea as firm allies. Now, in the case of Japan, I think that is probably a fairly straightforward matter. China and Japan have had long periods of intense rivalry going all the way back to the late 19th century, when Japan several times invaded China and the two countries fought bitter wars, and with the Chinese considering Japan to be an adversary and rival and even at times an enemy, and the Japanese increasingly thinking of China in the same way. I would add that this has not always been the case. There was a brief period in the 1980s when Japan and China seemed to be moving closer to each other, and when there was apparently growing friendship between the two countries, with Japan investing heavily in the Chinese economy at that time. But since then, relations have gone on a downward spiral, and the current Japanese government has increasingly come to see China as a major economic rival and a security threat, and is known to be concerned, as the United States is, with the growth of Chinese naval power. In South Korea's case, however, it is completely different. The South Koreans have a different relationship to China than Japan does. South Korea has not fought a war with China since the 16th century. And South Korea, on the contrary, tends to see China in much more friendly terms than the United States does. China is South Korea's biggest trading partner, and as I realized when I was visiting South Korea in the early 2000s, the extent of Chinese cultural influence in South Korea is not just extensive and profound, but also very, very long-lasting and goes very deep. In addition, the South Koreans have, for the last decades, been attempting in various ways to sort out their relationships with North Korea. They agreed, for example, to participate together in the Olympics some time ago, sending a joint Olympic team, and they have maintained a sporadic but at times active dialogue with North Korea. It's fair to say that that dialogue at the moment is on ice, with North Korea making strong statements against South Korea, but at the same time, the South Koreans overall undoubtedly want to see better relations with the North, and they are also repeatedly tantalized by the possibility that that a reconciliation with the North would allow South Korea to establish land links via the North through Eurasia all the way to Europe across the North Korean and Russian and perhaps even Chinese railway systems. In addition, though South Korea, and indeed Korea, has traditionally had edgy but by no means always hostile relations with China, for South Koreans, the primary regional rival and enemy is not China at all, but Japan. Japan was the colonial occupier of South Korea, indeed of the whole of Korea, in the first half of the 20th century, and the South Koreans still very much see Japan as the adversary and the rival. When I visited South Korea in the early to mid 2000s, I was again struck by the strong feelings many Koreans have about China, which remain very strong in South Korea and intense in North Korea. So, when President Moon came to Washington to speak with President Biden, he will have come with a different agenda in mind. He will have heard what President Biden wants to say about the importance of containing China, but he will have come to this with a different perspective than the Japanese leadership, than the Japanese Prime Minister will have done. So far as President Moon is concerned, he will want to maintain some degree of diplomatic maneuver. He will want to continue to maintain a friendly, or at least a cordial dialogue with Beijing, and he will not want to break links with North Korea entirely. There is a third aspect to South Korean foreign policy which doesn't get much attention, but which is no doubt becoming increasingly important. This is that South Korea has increasingly friendly relations with Russia, and here perhaps the emphasis on friendship can be stressed, because South Korea has increasingly come to see Russia as a major friend and partner in the Northeast Pacific. And of course, for the South Koreans, Russia is also a country which retains at least cordial relations with North Korea, and which they sometimes see as a possible venue, a possible mediator, enabling them to maintain discussions with the North Koreans when they're not able to speak to the North Koreans directly themselves. I don't want to overstress the last point. The major interlocutor between South Korea and North Korea is China, but there is no doubt at all that the Russians have a role. So President Moon will have come with a set of different objectives to Washington, and it is interesting to see the direction in which the negotiations between the United States and South Korea went over the course of this meeting between Biden and Moon. On the one hand, the South Koreans did sign up to statements which appeared to speak about the importance of maintaining peace in the Taiwan Straits. These are somewhat mild comments, but perhaps one could interpret them, if one wished, as siding more towards the United States than China over that issue. However, it turns out that in advance of that visit to Washington, the South Koreans contacted and exchanged views intensively with the Chinese, and gave the Chinese reassurances that South Korea is not interested in entering into a strong anti-Chinese alliance with Washington. Moreover, the South Koreans apparently have made clear to the United States that they still want to see better relations with North Korea. And here, perhaps, things will have taken a direction which the South Koreans will both be a little concerned about, but perhaps may not entirely find unwelcome. This is that President Biden, in my opinion wrongly, made it clear that he has no interest in meeting with the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un. Donald Trump, his predecessor, pursued a very active diplomacy with Kim Jong-un, which in the end went nowhere, as the United States refused to make any fundamental concessions in terms of the presence of US nuclear systems in South Korea, and basically insisted on North Korea's complete denuclearization and before any change in US policy, such as lifting of sanctions and the rest, might be considered. That is, of course, a total non-starter, and the North Koreans have made that clear, and they seem to be instead, at this moment in time, pressing ahead with their nuclear and ballistic missile programs. They demonstrated a new liquid-fueled mobile long-range ICBM at a military parade in North Korea in the autumn. And as I said, they are also busy enhancing their conventional forces. So on the one hand, this is, in my opinion, a foolish policy by the United States, refusing to negotiate with North Korea, but it is one that President Biden seems intent on following and is digging in on. He is not apparently even going to do that which President Trump did, which is meet with the North Korean leader. So the North Koreans are free, as they see it, to press ahead with their nuclear weapons programs and with their conventional arms programs. But there is, of course, another dimension to this, which is that the South Koreans, before Donald Trump stepped in on the scene, were, as I said, pursuing an active, if sporadic, dialogue with the North Koreans, seeking peace in the Korean Peninsula, or at least an improvement in relations with North Korea, and doing so at some distance from the United States. Donald Trump's intervention in Korean diplomacy, his attempt to establish direct contacts with North Korea, to speak directly to the North Korean leaders, even though they would not have been unwelcome in Seoul, did have the effect of pushing the intra-Korean dialogue to the margins, with the effect that everything in effect came to a standstill, both North Korea's relations with the United States and North Korea's relations with South Korea, because of the uncompromising hard line that the United States is insisting on taking. So, removing the United States from the diplomatic picture, going back, if you wish, to a situation such as the one which existed under the George W. Bush and Obama administrations, in which the United States is not engaging North Korea diplomatically, in a strange way, enables the South Koreans to speak to the North Koreans and to come to deals with them by themselves, unhindered. They don't have to worry about the Americans meddling and interfering in the process, imposing their own impossible conditions, making demands of the North Koreans, which the North Koreans will never accept, and thereby wrecking every chance for a diplomatic dialogue. The North Koreans and the South Koreans can, from now on, do what they were starting to do in the last months of Barack Obama's administration forge ahead with their relations with each other and not worry so much with the United States. So it's possible, I think it's actually quite likely, that this very hard line that Joe Biden is taking towards North Korea will not be entirely unwelcome in Seoul, but for different reasons from the one he thinks. It may turn out that far from the United States being able to force the North Koreans into concessions, it will be the United States which, in terms of Korean diplomacy, becomes increasingly marginalized and pushed to the edges. It always struck me that Donald Trump, with his somewhat instinctive approach to foreign policy, might have realized that, and one of the major reasons why he inserted himself, and thereby the United States, into the dialogue with North Korea was precisely because he was worried that the United States, by refusing to negotiate with Kim Jong-un and with North Korea, was making itself irrelevant as the two Koreas increasingly explored talks and discussions with each other. Now, there is another factor, which is that just as North Korea is pressing ahead with its weapons developments, so is South Korea. And it's quite interesting to see which country it is turning to increasingly for advice and help on this, because some South Korean weapons developments, at least, have been carried out with some input from Russia. It's the Russians, for example, who helped the South Koreans develop some of their surface-to-air missile systems. It seems that the Russians, by the way, might have done the same with North Korea. Some North Korean and surface-to-air missile developments look to me suspiciously like parallel Russian systems that we're starting to see increasingly being deployed. The Russians, of course, will strenuously dispute that. But I would also add that the recent North Korean tank, which was displayed by the North Koreans at that military parade in Pyongyang last autumn, also seems to have features which resemble in some ways Russia's latest Armata tank, even though it's clearly not similar or analogous. So who knows? One can never be sure exactly what is going on below the surface. But as far as Russian, South Korean arms exchanges, technology exchanges are concerned, there is no doubt at all that they are taking place to some degree. We don't know the extent, but we do know that the South Koreans have, as I said, obtained technology from the Russians and technical advice, and that this has enabled them to develop surface-to-air missiles. Now, it's going to go, it seems, further, because the South Koreans are now, like the North Koreans, intent on developing their own ballistic missiles. And they are apparently forging ahead with construction of a ballistic missile submarine. And one of the things that President Moon seems to have got from the United States is the green light from the United States to forge ahead with these developments. This comes just a few months after the South Koreans also confirmed that they are in the process of developing a ballistic missile submarine. Mind you, the North Korean ballistic missile submarine will apparently be nuclear powered, and the missiles it will be able to deploy will also be nuclear tipped as well. So it seems to me that what we are seeing are parallel military developments in the two Koreas. Both of them are pressing ahead with advanced submarine developments. Both of them are pressing ahead with advanced ballistic missile deployments and technology. Both of them may be getting some quiet help from the Russians. In the case of South Korea, indisputably. In the case of North Korea, possibly. And of course, in the case of North Korea, they have an advanced nuclear weapons capability, which so far South Korea does not seem to be interested in. But then who knows? Because, of course, South Korea does have the technological prowess and the industrial base to develop nuclear weapons if it should be minded so to do. Now, what would that mean? What would that mean if South Korea were to develop such a technology, such a nuclear weapons capability? Would it be a deterrent against North Korea? Well, yes, indisputably. Would it be a deterrent against China? Well, that too. But bear in mind what I said at the beginning, that South Korea does not perceive China as a rival. In my opinion, what all of these South Korean weapons developments are all about is something quite different. They're not really directed at China, which the South Koreans do not see as an adversary, and with which, as I said, they are conducting a very intense dialogue, one which extends to briefing the Chinese about their talks with the US president before they happen. Nor, I suspect, do they really see their weapons developments as intended to counter the United States. Rather, I expect all of these developments are intended further to give South Korea bargaining chips against the United States. Could it be that the long-term plan is to put South Korea in a position when they can tell the United States that actually we don't need your troops in South Korea anymore? We don't need your weapon systems, your anti-ballistic missile systems, your nuclear weapons in South Korea any longer, because we are perfectly capable of defending ourselves. We have a good and close relationship with Russia. We have a very strong economic relationship with China, and we are able to conduct good relations and good diplomacy with the Chinese. And as for the North Koreans, well, yes, obviously, they remain a problem, but it is a problem for us Koreans to sort out with each other. And we have shown in the past, and we will show again, that we are perfectly able to talk and negotiate with the North Koreans ourselves. So, if that is the long-term plan in South Korea, which, by the way, I am fairly sure that it is, then President Biden might not have got from President Moon exactly what he expected. Yes, the South Koreans have given some nice words about the Taiwan Straits. Words cost little, and those words, by the way, don't mean very much. They're very mild and they're very measured, and it seems, as I said, that the South Koreans cleared them in advance with Beijing. But in return, they've got the green light from the United States to pursue military developments, which in the end seem primarily designed not to counter China or even North Korea, but to buy South Korea political and diplomatic space from the United States so that the Koreans can forge ahead between themselves to achieve peace in the Korean peninsula, and so that they can position themselves effectively as a strong, independent country in their relations with Japan, China, Russia, and all the other nations in the Northeast Pacific. Should that happen, by the way, I will say straight away that I think that would be an altogether good thing. Korea is today an industrial and manufacturing and technological colossus. Samsung, alongside the companies in Taiwan, makes the most advanced microprocessors in the world. It is a hard-working, industrious country, and a country which, if it were to become united in some form, would become again a major player in international affairs. It has historically strong relations with China, and of course it has very good relations with Russia. Its relations with Japan are difficult and complex, but a united Korea would be in a very strong position to work with China and to make Japan accept its Korea not just as another country, a potential rival, but an equal. If it also hastens the day when the United States eventually departs from the Northeast Pacific, I, for one, will not be sorry. It seems to me that the United States maintaining its presence there is simply complicating relations between the countries of the Northeast Pacific, China, Korea, and Japan, in a way that is in the interests of none of these countries and which prevents peace being established there. So that's my take on the recent diplomacy. Thank you for joining me for this program today. I look forward to you joining me in future programs, both on this channel and in future channels, on our other channels, our main channel, The Duran, where I do programs with my colleague and friend Alex Christoforou, and also check out Alex's channel as well. And last but not least, check us out on our new platforms, especially Super U and Locals. And lastly, please don't forget to support us to the extent that you can via PayPal, Patreon, and Subscribestar, and check out our shop and look at the wonderful things that we have there. Our t-shirts, our sweatshirts, our hats, our hoodies, and all the rest. Last but not least, please don't forget to check your subscription to this channel and also press the like button if you like this video. Thank you very much for joining me today.